Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, all praise and thanks belong to God, the Lord of the world. May peace, blessings, and prayers be upon Prophet Muhammad, his family, his companions, and all of God's prophets and messengers, from Adam to Noah to Abraham to Moses to Jesus. Brothers and sisters, assalamu alaikum. May peace be upon you. This is Edward Ahmed Mitchell, the Deputy Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations, welcoming you to today's episode of Care on Air, titled Advancing the Legacy of Malcolm X, Palestine, and Beyond. I want to thank you all so much for joining us. A special thank you to our listeners on American Muslim 360. As always, if you have any questions during the program, you can put them in the comments on Facebook, and we will try to respond to those questions during the program, inshallah. With that, let's get started. As you all know, today is May 19th. This day marks 96 years since the birthday of Malcolm X, El-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz. If he were alive today, he'd be 96 years old. As you all know, he was assassinated on February 21st, 1965, at the age of 39, just before his 40th birthday. May Allah grant him paradise and guide us to benefit from his legacy. And today, that's what we want to do, inshallah, is to benefit from his legacy, to benefit from his wisdom and his guidance, and use that to help us respond to the challenges we are facing today, from domestic issues like police brutality, economic inequality, social immorality, to the challenges around the world. I mean, most obviously, the ongoing human rights abuses against the Palestinian people, as well as the rise of fascism and right-wing extremism around the world. You know, we almost want to ask ourselves the question, what would Malcolm do? And we don't know the answer to that question, right? We can never put words in his mouth or say for sure what he would have done if he were facing today's situations, but we can go back and look at what he said, look at what he thought, and use that as inspiration to help us meet the challenges of today. And we want to focus today on one aspect of Brother Malcolm's history, and that was near the end of his life, his emphasis not only on Black solidarity across America, regardless of religion, in the fight against racism, but international solidarity against racism and oppression. At the end of his life, he very much believed in the importance of uniting people of color around the world to confront the challenge of racism. And so as we think of that advice that he gave, that pursuit he had at the end of his life, and we think about what we're facing today, you know, is that something that is happening today? Is that something that should be happening today? Is that something that we as a Muslim community should be thinking about, right? Not necessarily racial solidarity, but religious solidarity, right? We've seen the rise of Islamophobia from China to France to Myanmar to Israel to America. You know, do we need to have more international Muslim solidarity to confront these challenges? Do we need more solidarity among people of color? And are we seeing that today, perhaps exemplified by the situation in Palestine and the world's response to it? So those are some of the issues we want to talk about today. And I think, alhamdulillah, we're going to be able to address them, inshallah, not too much in depth, but at least scratch the surface. And I want to bring on now our special guest to help us have this conversation. Please bring on now our special guest, Brother Mohammed Habay, who is the Development Coordinator of American Muslims for Palestine, which, as you all know, has been leading the struggle to reorient American foreign policy towards humanitarianism, towards justice, towards peace, especially as it relates to Palestine, to try to end our government's support for the Israeli government's human rights violations against the Palestinian people. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Mohammed. How are you?
Wa alaikum assalam, Brother Edward. I'm doing well.
Alhamdulillah.
Thank you for having me on today. Alhamdulillah. I'm very excited to talk about this subject, inshallah, and be participating with y'all.
Yes, absolutely, Brother Mohammed. I think it was last year during the height of the pandemic that we actually, AMP hosted a conversation about Black Palestinian solidarity. I remember it well because I remember it was during the pandemic. I think I was trapped in my car during that conversation, mashallah. And it was a great conversation. And so we're very happy to have you on now to discuss Brother Malcolm, what he means to you as a Palestinian American Muslim, what he means to American Muslims or Palestine, what he means to the struggle that we are dealing with today, whether that's the struggle against international Islamophobia, against the injustice being perpetrated against the Palestinian people. So inshallah, we want to dive into that. And we want to start by hearing from Brother Malcolm himself, inshallah. And so let's right now bring up our first video, Brother Malcolm. And we're going to, this is an interview that he did with the Canadian Broadcasting Company in 1964, just months before his assassination. And we're going to play part of this just to get a little flavor of where he was in his life after embracing mainstream Islam and starting to widen his perspective to that international solidarity. We're going to play part of this, then get some reaction, and we're going to play another video of him talking about the transition from a civil rights perspective to a human rights perspective. So let's play the first video, part of it.
Front Page Challenge welcomes the outspoken Negro leader, Malcolm X.
Sir, what's the real reason why you two men split? Is it merely ideological, or is it personality? What else?
Probably personality. It was not the statement that originally was given by the movement when we split. It's more personality than anything else.
You've called people like Martin Luther King, who just got a Nobel Peace Prize, an Uncle Tom. Is this correct? First?
Well, I'd rather say that in the States, there's a law that has recently been passed, or a decision handed down by the court, where if you call someone an Uncle Tom, they can sue you for libel.
Well,
so I never refer to them as Uncle Tom. I would say that Uncle Martin is my friend.
Uncle Martin is your friend, yet you would disagree with his approach to what he wants to accomplish.
Definitely. If his approach would bring about what the black man in America needs to completely eliminate the problem that we have, I would say well and good. But I very much doubt that anyone who adopts the approach that Martin Luther King has been teaching to our people in that country can point to any meaningful gains that has actually served to solve the problem.
Black Muslims have sometimes, whether you have or not, and I think probably you have sometimes, it seemed to me, been preaching hate to meet hate.
I don't advocate any kind of hate.
But there's a lot of talk that sounds very much like it.
No, I think that the guilt complex of the American white man is so profound until when you begin to analyze the real condition of the black man in America, instead of the American white man eliminating the causes that create that condition, he tries to cover it up by accusing his accusers of teaching hate. But actually, they're just exposing him for being responsible for what exists.
Well, that's something of an argument, but I've heard speeches made by some of the people of your group. I think I've heard you make speeches. It seemed to me that you were advocating what I would have to describe, I think, as violence to meet the serious injuries that have been done to your people, with which I totally agree.
I don't call that violence. I don't in any way encourage black people to go out and initiate acts of aggression indiscriminately against whites. But I do believe that the black man in the United States, and any human being, anywhere, is well within his right to do whatever is necessary, by any means necessary, to protect his life and property, especially in a country where the federal government itself has proven that it is either unable or unwilling to protect the lives and property of those human beings.
Just before Pierre takes it, you've got a pretty good fighter and the world's heavyweight champion lined up with you to help out. Yes, Pierre.
Mr. X, I guess I call you that. Is that the proper appellation, yes. Mr. X? I'm wondering if you still believe, because I think you certainly.
So, I want to start by giving a little perspective on where he was, right, at that time in his life. And one of the things that strikes me about that, Brother Muhammad, is that he's describing, number one, a debate happening within the black community, right, between him and Dr. King and others about whether or not Dr. King's tactics would be ultimately successful. And then number two, it's that discussion of the line between, hate speech and what is hate speech, what isn't hate speech, what do you do when you're confronted by an oppressive, violent power, can you defend yourself, do you? And this discussion sounds remarkably similar to me to the discussion that takes place about Palestine right now, right? That maybe even the Muslim community debates about how to respond to the issue of Palestine. So before we get into that and nitty-gritty, let me just start by asking you a broad question, Brother Muhammad, which is, how has the legacy of Malcolm X impacted you as an activist for Palestinian freedom?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think the first thing when we discuss Malcolm X is just understanding what he meant to us as Muslim Americans. To know that there was a man in the 60s advocating for not only like our rights as Muslims, but for the rights of our African American brothers and sisters who believe in our faith and may not believe in our faith, is very powerful. And it shows the importance, to me at least, of being able to not only stand powerfully for yourself, but stand for others as well. You know, when we talk about Malcolm X, Malcolm X, in my opinion, he's the dude they didn't want us to look up to. You know, we're oftentimes we're given a lot of leaders who we should look up to, given to us by opponents, by people who may not believe in what we believe in. Malcolm X was the person who, no matter how hard they tried to make people not know who he is and not pay attention to him, the people still believed in him. The people still respected him. And even though we lost him prematurely, and we ask Allah to grant him his ultimate mercy and accept him as a shaheed, that he, till this day, we benefit from his lessons. We benefit from the things he used to preach back in the 60s. And, you know, it's important to note that when Malcolm X was speaking against Zionism, he was speaking against Zionism before 1967, before Israel occupied the West Bank, before Israel occupied the Gaza Strip, before they occupied the Sinai, before they attacked Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt. He was talking about this before they continued their Zionism and ethnic cleansing. And that's very important, because at that time, many black leaders weren't doing it. We saw in 68, a lot of black leaders started talking more about what was going on, about the occupation. And we even saw, to a certain extent, Martin Luther King Jr. Become a bit different in the way he looked at apartheid Israel. But Malcolm X was one of the first in this community to come out proudly and strongly against the ideas of Zionism. So as an activist who's grown up here in America, who considers himself a proud Muslim American and a Palestinian, when I look at Malcolm X, I see a role model for our community that, unfortunately, for a long period of time, we did not understand, and we did not try to benefit from his lessons as much as we should have. And I feel like that's definitely changing a bit more now. I feel like in the past couple of years, our community is doing their best to reclaim the narrative of black leaders in this country, to reclaim the narrative of black Muslim leaders in this country, who not only helped promote Islam and helped take Islam to a new level in this country, but did their work for the greater community and the greater good of our people here in America.
Yeah. Now, one of the interesting things, Muhammad, is that, you know, now thinking about the video that we just played of him, is that, you know, if you look at obviously how he spoke about other black leaders, you know, before his transition to mainstream Islam, he was much more hostile and sometimes even derogatory in how he spoke about them, right? Once he embraced mainstream Islam, he still disagreed with Dr. King, but he held back from using that sort of vitriolic, you know, derogatory language about him, right? There was a level of respect that he gave Dr. King late in his life. And so, you know, I think that that's the first lesson I think we can take of this, we as Muslims, as we discuss and debate strategy, right? Do we need to have a civil rights strategy exclusively? Do we need to approach Palestine as only a human rights issue, or is it also something that needs to be a global, you know, Muslim Ummah thing? You know, reasonably can disagree, and people might even have different strategies, right, about how they're tackling the issue. And we can disagree about some of those things, you know, in a way that's not vitriolic, not hostile, you know, but at the same time, as long as we're all following those same principles, right? Staying within the lines of the principles, trying to reach the same goals. That's the first lesson I take. The second lesson that I took from those remarks is that, you know, he commented on how racist white Americans at the time accused him of being a purveyor of hate. And his response to that was that, no, in fact, what they are doing is they are deflecting, right? That, in fact, they cannot stand being called out for what they do, so they accuse me of doing what they actually do. And so when I think about, you know, especially Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government, and, you know, how they respond to the Palestinian people, right? When the Palestinian people, you know, are shot with rubber bullets, attacked with stun grenades while they're praying at the third holiest site in Islam, right? When they're being expelled from their neighborhoods and Sheikh Jarrah, when you've got families and doctors being bombed in Gaza with precision guided missiles, by the way, not errant rockets that can't aim, but with precision guided missiles, you got families, doctors being killed in Gaza. And yet Benjamin Netanyahu says, well, these people are the terrorists. These are the people who hate freedom. These are the people who don't want peace. And so it's this warped, strange deflection. We see that in American discourse, right? Where, it's 9 Palestinian children were killed within 24 hours of the violence escalating. And you had so many political leaders releasing statements, you would have thought that it was the Palestinians who killed 9 Israeli children, the statements they were putting out. And so you always see this with people who engage in oppression, is that they accuse their victims of doing what they are actually doing. And so that's the second observation I noticed, that whether it's American racism back in the 60s or even South African apartheid, when Nelson Mandela was accused of being a terrorist, when it was in fact the South African government engaged in terrorism, this pattern repeats itself. By the way, same thing with China and the Uyghurs, right? What does the Chinese government say? That we're trying to stop terrorism, right? We're trying to protect people. It's like they're telling the truth, speaking in opposite, right? Whatever they say, the opposite is true. So that's second observation. Now, Mohammed, I want to turn to you now and ask you this, that as you think about, what is happening right now in Palestine, it seems to me there has been a sea change in how the world is talking about this issue, and how even in America, the media and many politicians are talking about this issue. Have you noticed a shift towards more national and international solidarity with the Palestinian human rights movement than you saw, for example, in 2014 during the last attack on Gaza? Have you seen, that transition towards more international solidarity, that kind of thing that Malcolm was calling for, to have that international unity against oppression?
Definitely, and I'm glad you brought that up. When we talk about what's going on now in Sheikh Jarrah, in Jerusalem, around 1948 Palestine, and even in Gaza, people are listening. People want to hear about what's going on, and people want to speak out about what's going on. And when things first escalated in Sheikh Jarrah, when they tried to begin their ethnic cleansing and forcing those families out of their homes, people started talking. And then, we saw the people of Palestine come out very strong in support of them. And we all saw the horrible videos coming out of Masjid al-Aqsa as Israeli forces attacked worshippers in the final nights of Ramadan. The world saw that. And I do believe that historically and around the world, people have always supported Palestine. I believe that public opinion has always been more supportive of Palestine. Even just the other day, I was mentioning this just yesterday. Even the other day, when Netanyahu posted a list of countries that have been supporting Israel, people were in the comment section posting pictures from those countries of huge protests happening in support of the Palestinian people. So at the end of the day, I do believe that that people around the world, the average citizen, supports justice. And we believe at the end of the day, and we hope that everyone at the end of the day has this sense of morals and has this ability to understand that we have to support those who are oppressed, no matter who they are. Specifically here in America, we are seeing a change. It's definitely due to the work that organizations like American Muslims for Palestine been doing for these past couple of years. American Muslims for Palestine was founded a little over a decade ago. When we started having these conversations with legislatures, with the media, with communities around the country, they were hard conversations. They're not hard anymore. People want to hear what we have to say. People want to support us. And even though we see that there are still problems with the media, just the other day, the New York Times published an article about how the first night of Ramadan, Israeli forces walked into Masjid al-Aqsa and cut the mics so that whatever happened that night, any of the worship that was going on that night, would not disturb whatever program, Zionist event was going on in the city at the time. And I think the fact that we're seeing this switch from media, from celebrities, all over social media is a very big deal. And it really shows that at the end of the day, what's true and what's right is always going to come to light, inshallah. And we believe that as Muslims. And while we're on the topic, our Martin Luther King once said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it always bends towards justice. So of course, at the end of the day, we definitely see this change and we appreciate it, but it also makes us understand that we have to work more.
Yeah. Now let's, thank you, Bobby. Let's go to the next video now. This will be Malcolm, Brother Malcolm, discussing, in his perspective, the need to shift from approaching the struggle for Black freedom and equality in America from a domestic civil rights fight to an international fight. Now, what's interesting about this, we're going to play it in a moment, is that I think you're going to find, if you really look at the legacy of Dr. King and Brother Malcolm, that they were both right, and arguably they were both wrong to some extent. Brother Malcolm, he was convinced that the civil rights movement had not achieved and would not achieve, any real significant tangible change. But it did, right? The laws did change, and it took time, for those changes to be implemented. But if you look at the state of Black America, especially in terms of employment, access, our role in different areas of life, corporate America, the media, politics, those things did change for the better. And so to that extent, I think he was mistaken, but he was also right. And we saw that in the CBS interview. He said that the civil rights movement would not solve all of the problems, not even close. And we still see that is definitely true. Why is there a Black Lives Matter movement, right? We are fighting the issues of systemic racism, right? We've got economic inequality. We've still got housing segregation. We've still got economic injustice. We've still got police brutality. We still have racism in many manifestations. And so, in some ways, what he was saying was absolutely prescient, that the movement would not solve everything. But Dr. King was also right that peaceful movement for change of getting out to the hearts and minds of Americans could work. And it did, by and large, work. It was amazingly successful. Within a couple of generations, this country is radically different now than it was in 1965, but it's still not where it needs to be. But now let's listen to what he has to say about the international solidarity, because I think this is interesting now, especially for the Palestinian struggle, and how we address that. So let's play this, a bit of this.
Well, for the past 10 years, the struggle in America has been confined to what has been projected to the public as a civil rights struggle. And in that context, it has remained a domestic problem. It has remained within the jurisdiction of the United States. And as such, it has been impossible for the Afro-Americans or American Negroes to try and enlist the support of other dark-skinned people who are being oppressed the world over in that struggle. And the difference now in the direction that the struggle is taking from the direction that the struggle has been going in the past, there are many of our people who are thinking more deeply and more broadly and are beginning to see the importance of lifting it out of the national context, or out of the domestic context, or beyond the jurisdiction of the United States government. And the only way this can be done is by internationalizing the problem and putting it at a level where it can be taken into the United Nations, and then all of the other independent nations on this earth can involve themselves in our struggle and support us. And the only way by which this can be done, instead of it being called civil rights in the future, we're going to have to label it a human rights struggle, or the struggle for human rights. And as such, we can then take it into the United Nations through the avenues that have been set up by the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. We can take our problem before the United Nations in the same manner that the problem of South Africa, Angola, Mozambique, Hungary, the Arab refugee problem, it becomes a world problem. And as the world problem, then the Afro-American, or the so-called Negroes, equal results, because it's not left up to the one who's responsible for it anymore, but it's put at a level where the whole can see that our plight is wrong. It stood in our path in the past. It also makes a difference in the leadership. Those who have been posing as leaders of our people in America in the past, they can pose on this local stage where Uncle Sam is the master of the show and can prop them up and make them look good or make them look better than they actually are by giving them token gains and building them up an image. But when they step onto the international stage or the world stage, then Uncle Sam can't prop them up anymore. And their ability or lack of ability becomes exposed. And if they can lead us forward, they remain leaders. But if they can't, then they have to step aside, and more qualified and bona fide leaders step up from the masses of our people, and then we get faster progress, we get more results. The Afro-American or American Negro intellectual perhaps permitted himself to be used in a way that wasn't really beneficial to the overall Afro-American struggle. But I think today these intellectuals have begun to undertake a new appraisal of the problem, looking at it as it actually is, and are beginning to see it more in the international context and the relation that it has with the African struggle. And the African intellectual is beginning to look at the problem in the African context and see that what might be good in one country, in order for it to be used in another country, has to be rearranged. You take African socialism. Many of the African intellectuals that have analyzed the approach of socialism are beginning to see where the African has to use a form of socialism that fits into the African context, whereas the form that is used in a European country might be good for that particular European country. It doesn't fit as well into the African context. So I think the African intellectual is making that contribution, and he's making it well.
So, Mohammed, let me turn over to you now. So, when thinking of this issue of internationalizing the struggle, I think what's interesting about, the situation we face now is that, number one, the idea of going to the United Nations, right, to try to convince a government to change course. The reason that's very difficult to do is that if that government that's causing the problem is a superpower, or it's on the UN Security Council, you can pass all the nice General Assembly resolutions you want, but nothing official is going to get done to the UN Security Council unless that government approves it. So whether that's dealing with China and the Uyghurs, or America and the Palestinians, or France and what it's doing to Muslims in its country, there's a limit. So so number one, my question to you is I know the Palestinian people, the government itself has, made these appeals to the United Nations and the ICC to get involved. Do you think that can solve the problem, or is that maybe just one prong of the struggle, right? That's something you do to try to raise awareness, put the pressure, but that's not going to solve the issue by itself. What are your thoughts on that internationalizing of the effort?
Definitely. I think, well, first off, the Palestinian movement is definitely already internationalized. People around the world, from Palestine to the Philippines, from Palestine to Mexico, even all around Europe, people understand the Palestinian cause, and they've always actually had a better understanding and a better belief system when it came to Palestine. Like, they understood the oppression, they understood what was going on, even if their countries weren't supportive or their countries weren't willing to support. When we talk about the Palestinian cause, at the end of the day, for us to be able to achieve freedom, for us to be able to achieve justice for our people, we need to take every route possible, and that includes, part of that is going to the UN, part of that is going to the ICC. But in addition to that, for people who live here in America, our job is to make sure that our country is no longer complicit in the crimes committed by the Israeli government. The bombs raining down on Gaza are paid by American taxpayer dollars. We cannot allow that anymore. And as we're discussing this, there is an effort, for the first time ever, there is an effort in Congress to make sure American money is no longer being used to support Israel's crimes against the Palestinians. Right now, Congresswoman AOC dropped a resolution to help stop the $735 million in weapons that are supposed to be going to Israel. This is a revolutionary bill in Congress. The first time it's ever happened, very groundbreaking. And we definitely need as much support for that as possible, as there's only, it's a very limited time for us to be able to stop this.
Do we have
definitely
we can sign? I know there have been, if there's anything you want, you can put it in the comments and people can sign it from AMP. Anything they can do, inshallah.
Definitely. So I don't have the link on me right now, but I would recommend for anyone who can go on to AM Palestine, our Facebook page. It is the first post. The link is right there. We're asking everyone to reach out to their congressional representative and their 2 senators to make sure that this bill goes through, inshallah. We cannot allow our money to go and be complicit in the killing of Palestinian children anymore. So definitely, like when we're talking about this question, everyone has their own responsibility to Palestine. You know, for us living in America, it's different than those who live in the UK, than those who live in Australia, than those who live in the Middle East. Our obligation is to make sure that our country is no longer complicit. And that also goes to the UN as well. Our country refused to support a UN resolution for a ceasefire that was coming out of the Security Council. They were the only country to not support it. And this happened just last week. As Palestinian children are dying, our country took its time to call for a ceasefire, even though our country is funding the crimes that are happening to the Palestinian people. So definitely, I think for us who live here in America, we need to understand our responsibility, and that starts with holding our elected officials accountable and making sure that our country is no longer complicit in the crimes that Israel is committing against the Palestinian people.
Absolutely. I mean, we have got to stop funding human rights violations overseas. It's simple as that, right? And may Allah forgive us for the wrong that has been done with our tax dollars and guide us to offset the bad of it with good, through raising our voices and calling for something better. So look, as we wrap up, Mohammed, I just want to take a few lessons here. So from what we've heard from Brother Malcolm and from our conversation. So I think number one lesson is that as our community debates these issues, if people take different angles to try to address this issue, we sometimes might disagree, but we can disagree respectfully, right? Number one, just like, he decided to do near the end of his life. Number two, that we have got to have solidarity, ideally international solidarity. And I think that, as you noted, Palestine's already an international issue, but as a Muslim community, the fate of Al-Aqsa Masjid, the fate of the Palestinian people, many of whom are Muslim, this is a human rights issue. It's an American issue. It's, in my opinion, an issue for Black people, because I recognize the obvious similarities between what Black people and the Palestinian people experience. But it also is a Muslim issue, right? But we don't have that international Muslim solidarity behind Palestine, especially at the governmental level. Maybe at the people level, absolutely, right? And so, I think we as people, as Muslim people around the world, need to have that solidarity against both what's happening to the Palestinian people, but also the Uyghurs and others, right? That we have such a huge voice. There are 1.5 to 1.9 billion of us, and we're getting picked apart because we're all separated. We're separated by ethnicity and race and nationality, and you're Sunni, I'm Shia, you're this, you're that, and we're just getting picked apart, right? And so, I think a lesson we can take from Brother Malcolm is that, he advocated for international Black solidarity against racism. Right? Some Black people might have been Muslim, Christian, atheist, even Jewish. Some Black people might have been communists, socialists, capitalists. But he said people were attacking you not because you're communist or socialist or Muslim or Christian. They're going after you because you're Black. And so for us as Muslims right now, whether it's in France or China or Myanmar or even to some extent in Palestine, I have no doubt there is an Islamophobic aspect to the Israeli government's attacks on the Palestinian people, especially at Masjid al-Aqsa, that just as people hate us because we're Muslim, we have to unite because we're Muslim against global Islamophobia. And also take that lesson from Malcolm that you can also unite with people of other faiths and backgrounds, right, against oppression, because oppression is wrong. No matter what your religion is, your background is, it's wrong for all of us. And so as we ask that question to ourselves, what would Malcolm X do today? We cannot answer that question. We can't, put words in his mouth, but we can say, what did Malcolm do at the time? And what lessons can we draw from that? What was going on then? What of that is going on today in different forms? And how can we take what he did and apply it? And if we've learned something that he didn't get to know at the time, because he was always evolving, he was always learning. That's the brilliant thing about him, is that he was able to admit, I was wrong, I'm going to try something different. We can also look at what he was advising at the end of his life and say, okay, that was good. Maybe that wouldn't work. We're going to tweak it a little bit. And so I think Malcolm X Day, as we look back 96 years after his birth, we can continue to benefit from his legacy and inshallah continue to advance his legacy to the benefit of all people, including the Palestinian people, inshallah. So Brother Muhammad, thank you so much for joining us. We greatly appreciate the time with you. And everyone, please make sure to visit American Muslims for Palestine Facebook page, Twitter page, follow it, keep track of what they're doing, and support their efforts to advance justice for all people, including the people of Philistine, of Palestine. Thank you, Brother Muhammad. Wayak, wayak. And thank you all for joining us today. Greatly appreciated. Inshallah, we'll see you tomorrow at 3 o'clock for the next usually scheduled episode of Care on Air. Until then, assalamu alaikum. May peace be upon you.